looking at just her political career, it's quite the resume. Libby Davies was the Member of Parliament for Vancouver East from 1997 to 2015. She was also served as House Leader of the NDP party as well as the Deputy Leader. Prior to entering federal politics, she helped found the Downtown Eastside Residents Association and served as Vancouver City Councillor 1982 to 1993. That was just her political life. She moved to Vancouver in 1969. Before being elected to Parliament, she was in many grassroots political organizations in the downtown east side of Vancouver. Along with her partner Bruce Erickson, she founded the Downtown Eastside Residents Association and became an influential low-income housing advocacy group. She was also instrumental in a campaign to save the Carnegie Library. For 24 years, she was in a common-law relationship with Bruce Erickson, who died of cancer in 1997. They had a son, Leaf. In 2001, she became the first female Canadian member of Parliament to reveal that she was in a same-sex relationship, and that does not also include the safe injection sites and rights for sex workers. You can read it all in her memoir, Libby Davies. The book is called Outside In, and I was lucky enough to sit down with her. Here's my interview with her in the Doghouse.
Welcome to the Doghouse. Have a listen as we take a look at life, love, and art in all its forms. Here's your host, the Rock Dog, Andrew Davis.
My name is Andrew Davis. I am the Rock Dog, and this is the Doghouse, and I'm excited today. There is a new book out, a political memoir, Outside In, written by Libby Davies, who at one time was the deputy or the House Leader for the NDP, correct?
Yes, and the deputy leader, too, of the party.
But before that, you have been an activist for years and years and years. I really, I read the book. Tell us about Bruce Erickson.
Well, Bruce, I could have written the whole book just about Bruce. In fact, I might do that one day. I met Bruce when I was 19 years old. We lived together for 24 years. He was an incredible character. He was the guy that basically transformed what had been known as Skid Road in Vancouver to a community, or it was a community, but he kind of put it on the map, the downtown east side, which of course many people in BC are familiar with. And Bruce was had a very low-level education, but he was highly educated in his own way, like a life learner. He was a kind of a natural organizer, leader. He worked in the labor movement, various jobs. And he was just a guy who went out there and made an incredible difference in people's lives in the downtown east side, but in Vancouver overall. Unfortunately, he died in 1997, very shortly before I got elected as a member of Parliament, so it was a very difficult time in our family. But he was an incredible guy, and people still come up to me today and talk about Bruce and, what he did and just how he kind of forged ahead. He didn't let anything stop him.
Did you realize at time that you were breaking societal norms?
Probably. My mother kind of flipped out when she learned I was living with a man 25 years older than me and, Skid Road.
Right.
Yeah, I knew, when we ran for city council together, we both got elected eventually. There was like crazy, stupid stories about, Erickson's trying to get his wife elected. Well, first of all, we weren't married. And there was such sexism. And I'm sure there are people who, questioned what I was doing with Bruce, maybe what he was doing with me. But, we loved each other. We had a great relationship. We have a son who's now 40 years old. His name is Leif Erickson. And you know what? Andrew, I never really cared what people thought. It's like my life. You love who you love. I learned so much from Bruce, and I wouldn't change a thing.
Love is love, right? And even the way that, you quote unquote came out with your best friend, falling deeply in love with your best friend. A little bit unconventional the way you did that.
Yeah, I guess I do kind of break the rules. But you just don't know what's going to happen and who you're going to meet, who you fall in love with, and what kind of relationships you have. And I feel fortunate that I'm open about that, open-minded, and I don't really care what other people think. And I wish that for other people. I see that it's still difficult for people to come out. I mean, gosh, we had the mayor of Ottawa. Did you see that? 40 years. He was basically in the closet. My God. So I want to be a person, a role model, I guess you would call it. Like live your life and don't be afraid. But I also want to be aware that for some people it's really hard, right? Like coming out, especially in a smaller community, or maybe it's in a community where these things are looked at very differently. And so it is really hard. And I think we have to be really aware of that, sensitive of that. And of course, in some places in the world, if you're gay, you could be dead. You experience violence and the risk of death. So it's still a very serious situation for many people.
What do you think of the conservative standpoint on it? I know Mr. Scheer doesn't attend any of the Pride events.
I wish he would. It's like so silly. I don't know if you remember the Walk for Peace that used to happen in Vancouver in the 80s at the height of the Cold War. I mean, like 50,000 people used to come out. And I kind of feel like the Pride Parade now in Vancouver and elsewhere, I feel like it's that same kind of thing, right? It's like an outpouring of humanity. Mm-hmm. And whether you're gay or straight or whatever your orientation or whatever your belief. And so I feel like, he's missing out on such a fun thing. And, why would he do that? Does he feel beholden to a certain group? I do remember the debates in Parliament, though, in 2005 on same-sex marriage. And in fact, myself and Bill 6A, a gay man, a member of Parliament for Burnaby Douglas, and Riel Menard, who was a Bloc MP from Quebec, we actually wrote a personal letter to all of the party leaders, Stephen Harper, Jack Layton, I guess it was, Paul Martin, and we expressed our deep, deep concern how vitriolic and hateful the debate was coming. And we said, this is personal. You're talking about us. You're talking about our lives and many other Canadians. And we sort of wanted to instill a sense of dignity and respect. So I remember it very well, and I remember Andrew Scheer's speech as well.
One thing that you do, you talk about dignity and respect, and I think you carry that throughout your life. Reading your book and talking about your work with the homeless in the downtown east side, with the drug addicts, with the sex workers, working on getting the safe injection site. And in the face of adversity where people are telling you, well, you can't do this, these people are trash, how did you stay so steadfastly strong in your belief?
I think, Andrew, is because of the people I worked with, people like Bud Osborne, who was one of the founders of the Vancouver area network of drug users, Vandu. Bud was an extraordinary man, a former person who used drugs. He died in 2014. So it was like literally my constituents, the people I was working with. Those are the people who kept me really grounded. And so when I would come back home and go to the Main and Hastings and hang out, talk to people, it was those compelling stories. It was seeing what people were going through, how hard it was. It's really hard to survive if you're a person who uses drugs. The drug market now is so poisonous, right? We've seen thousands of people dying from overdoses just in our province alone. Mm-hmm. And so I felt like the whole sort of criminalization thing, which was very prevalent then, the idea of like tougher laws, more cops, lock them up. I mean, it was just a completely failed response, both economically and socially and politically. And I felt that I had to speak out because literally my constituents were dying. And I thought, well, you know what? If I don't get reelected, so be it. But, I got to get out there and say something. If it was people dying of chickenpox or whatever, it would be a national crisis. And yet these were people who were marginalized and basically discarded, right, and demonized in many instances. So I learned a lot from the people I worked with, and I still do. I'm still working on the issue, by the way, just in a different role, obviously. But to me, it's a critical issue still in BC and across the country.
Yeah, there's people literally dying minute by minute, and the government doesn't seem to want to do anything.
The big thing. Yeah.
Go ahead.
No, go ahead. No, I was just going to say 20 years ago, the issue was the safe injection site, but now that's like, it's just like nothing. It's like, of course it has to happen. The big issue now is to create a safe supply so that people don't have to rely on a toxic, poisonous drug market. That is the most critical thing that we need to do, and we have to keep pushing for it.
I firmly support decriminalization. I just think it's the way to go. It's the way to go. It's been proven in other countries, and I firmly support it. I wanted to ask you kind of a weird off-the-beaten-path question, maybe here. You're mentioning in your book, of course, Mr. Jack Layton, but also Bernie Sanders in the U.S., who has labeled himself a democratic socialist. Do we have one of these in Canada? Do we have another Jack? Do we have a Bernie?
Really great question, and it's not off the beaten track at all. I love it. Yeah, we do. One of the things I feel really good about right now, even though the NDP hasn't been doing so hot in the polls federally, is I feel like there's a whole new generation of political leadership emerging. I mean, we've got some like amazing candidates. There's Laurel Collins in Victoria, for example. There's a young gay black activist in Toronto, Paul Taylor. I could name a whole number of candidates. And to me, they're part of what I see going on in the U.S. as well. A young leadership that's emerging. They're very progressive. They are doing their politics differently. And I think that's really hopeful. It's hopeful for us in Canada. And of course, we're seeing it to some extent in the U.S. as well, pushing against that horrible man who I don't even want to name.
Mm-hmm.
And in terms of the Bernie Sanders, this might sound a bit funny and off the beaten track, but, I supported Charlie Angus when the NDP had the leadership. And I always felt like he kind of had a bit of the Bernie Sanders vibe. He was kind of like very, very folksy and straightforward. And, Charlie's still there. Sven Robinson's running again. So I do feel hopeful. And we have to grow the movement. And, what I keep saying to people who say, what's going to happen in the election? And, what about Scheer? I keep on saying, you know what? Vote for what you believe in. Trust yourself. If we don't grow our own movement, and I mean a progressive movement, a left movement, a movement based on social justice, a movement that's based on empowering people, then what are we doing? If we're only here to say, I got to stop this, like we have to grow our own movement. And so I do feel hopeful about that with some of the folks that I see emerging in the NDP who are running. And I'm like, okay, I want to get on board. I want to help you.
I actually see a lot of young people, a lot of millennials that are stepping into that role. Some of them, my nieces and nephews and even my kids as well. Do you think that the NDP is not too far left, or should they go even further left?
Well, the platform, I don't know if it's actually called the platform, but the program that they came out, it's called a New Deal for People or something like that. It's actually, I think, the best program I've ever seen the NDP produce federally. I feel really good about it. So the job is to get out there and communicate and engage with people. So, I want the NDP to be a clear left-wing party that's bold, that has a vision. I believe, Andrew, that the NDP is the only party that can deal with a climate emergency because we don't throw people under the bus. We're not going to leave workers out of their jobs. We were founded in the labor movement. And so I think we have a very important role to play in changing the economy. The economy has got to be transformed, not just in terms of climate justice, but in terms of decent jobs, fair wages, equality. Like when things are so dark, it's also the time to take the opportunity and to do something that's very transformative. And I believe very strongly that the NDP is the party to do that. We got to work bloody hard at it. We always do. And I hope that we'll end up playing a very key role in whatever comes out of the federal election in Parliament. We've done that in the past. Jack Layton showed that, you could make a lot of progress. You could get things done. We've got to keep at that.
I was going to bring up Jack Layton. Obviously, you know the man extremely well. He is like what you saw, is he not?
Oh, you know what? Sometimes people have a public persona and they have a private persona, and they don't quite jive. Jack was in private, in his home, in his community, exactly what you saw in public. He loved people. He engaged with people. He got energy from people. He had just boundless energy. I mean, he put all of us to shame the way he traveled back and forth and, went to things. And so he was a pretty remarkable guy. I mean, and Jack, it's interesting, though, because there's always contradictions. Jack wasn't that left wing. I mean, some people say he was taking the NDP more to the center, and maybe he was. But I think what was special and unique about him was that he really resonated with people. People believed who he was and what he was saying and what he wanted to do. And that's, a very important thing in the political arena, and Jack had that.
I think a lot of people said the same thing. Jack reminded them of when Obama in the States, right? That same kind of, he gave the message of hope and change. And if we pull together, we can do this. Exactly.
And it sounds so easy, doesn't it, when you just say it?
Yep.
But to actually make it happen, to actually bring people together. So, I always say to people, it's not only what you stand for. What we stand for is very important, what you believe in, but it's how you do your politics. It's how you work with people. And I learned a lot of lessons about that in politics. It is about the relationships that you have, even with your adversaries. I always tried to be respectful of the adversaries that I had because, I had to work with them too. And I had to, on some things, try and win them over. So I don't really like that kind of toxic politics, right? Where it's like, bludgeon someone on the other side, or worse, bludgeon someone on your own side. I really have no time for that kind of politics. And as I get older, and now that I've left Ottawa, it's, every time I see that playing out, I think, oh my God, I'm so glad I'm not part of that. I want to change that. I still want to change that.
Is that part of the reason why you walked away, or were you just, you figured?
No, I could have stayed on, but I felt like it was time. I'd been there 18 years. I felt like it was time for me to play a different role and again, for new people to emerge. Going back and forth to Ottawa for 18 years takes a lot of energy, especially from the West Coast. I loved what I did. I represented the most amazing riding in East Vancouver. So, it was I guess a number of those kind of things that came together, and I just thought, this is the time. It's time for me to do something in a different way. So, yeah, that's the decision I made.
When you decided not to run for leader, as you say in your book, part of it was because that you didn't speak French very well. Do you think that should be a requisite for the prime minister chair? Yeah.
Yeah, we are. I mean, Canada is an officially bilingual country. I mean, this is actually a very important legacy of Jack Layton, that he brought the NDP into a much more officially bilingual position. Yes, I do think it's important. It used to be that a few decades ago you could get away with, you say, oh, well, I'd learn French, and you do, but really, I think you have to be bilingual, and that's just the way it is. Mm-hmm. I mean, we're from the West Coast, so it's not, it's not so much a part of our lives. And I learned that kind of with a shock when I went to Ottawa, that the power in central Canada and eastern, central Canada, it's very much there. And of course the role of Quebec in Canada. So I do think it's important, and I wouldn't shy away from that and sort of fudge it. I think, a prime minister, a leader of a party, they need to be bilingual, and not in a token way, but in a real way.
What do you feel? Do you have a comment on the SNCLavalin scandal that is Dawg in the prime minister right now?
I sure do, Andrew.
I figured you would.
What? And you know what really bugs me? I mean, so much of the attention went to the situation with Jody Wilson-Raybould, and obviously that was a very important story that unfolded, no matter what you think about what she did or not. But what I found really quite staggering, that really got missed for a long time, and even now it's not the main piece, is the fact that they brought in the law in the first place. You know, so here's this special piece of legislation to basically let big corporations off the hook from criminal negligence or wrongdoing. And I remember being in Ottawa with Alexa McDonough, who was a former leader of the NDP, and she fought tooth and nail to make sure that corporations like the Westray Mining Corporation, where I don't know if you remember, but years ago there was a big mining accident and miners were killed in Cape Breton, I think it was. And we fought so hard to have legislation in Ottawa that would make corporations culpable for the decisions in their labor practices, their ethical practices. And so what really struck me about the whole affair was not only sort of the way it played out and the way the media treated the two women, in I think a very different way than they would treat men who resigned from cabinet. But to me, it was about the legislation and the fact that the Liberals let that go through, not let it. They engineered it to go through so quietly, and most people never even realized it. It was buried in a budget bill and some kind of omnibus bill. And, you know, basically they were doing favors for their big friends, and whether it's SNCLavalin or it could be another business or corporation. And so I really question the basis of that law itself. And then, of course, the fact that they tried to put pressure on her, she blew the whistle on that. And I think, it's become a very important story that has a lot of political repercussions.
Do you think he should resign?
Well, we have an election coming up. The people of Canada will decide that.
People will decide,
in October, we all get to decide that. That's probably the best idea of whether somebody should resign or not.
Tell us about Kim.
Kim is my partner. Kim is the publisher at rebel.ca. She works very hard to keep independent, progressive media alive in this country. We have a great life together, and we share lots of interests. We travel. She's one of these folks who can work virtually. So wherever we happen to be, she's still working away, which I find quite remarkable because I'm not sure I could do that. But yeah, so we have a great relationship, and I'm very fortunate to know her. We met in Ottawa, as you read in the book.
Yep. It was speaking of the book, a political memoir, outside in. It was I read it in one day. That's how much I couldn't put the book down. I literally could not put it down. I urge everybody to read this book. It is absolutely outstanding. I know you're coming to Courtney. You're going to do a book signing as well. I'll post stuff in my Facebook page.
Yeah, at the library. Oh, thank you so much. I've had such great fun going to the various book events and meeting people. And it's not a traditional reading kind of thing. It's more about let's have a discussion about what's going on, around us, about politics. So that's what we'll do in Courtney too.
And I look forward to meeting you.
I look forward to meeting you too.
You've been listening to The Doghouse with Andrew Davis.